New Mexico Territory, 1885. Clara Winters sat alone on the porch of her modest homestead, the setting sun painting the desert in hues of amber and gold. At 45, the lines on her face told stories of hardship and solitude. 20 years a widow, she had built a life of quiet independence, yet emptiness lingered in her heart. When the Apache warrior Shadow Wolf appeared at her fence line, she should have been afraid. Instead, she found herself confessing her deepest truth to this stranger, whose eyes held wisdom beyond his years. "I've never been loved," she whispered, the words carried away by the desert wind. Not truly. Could this unexpected encounter bridge two worlds divided by conflict? Will Clara find the courage to embrace a love that defies the boundaries of culture and time? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Clara's homestead as she moved through her daily routine with practiced efficiency. Her small adobe house stood proudly on a gentle rise, its plastered walls the color of the earth itself. A vegetable garden stretched behind, neat rows testament to her diligence. 20 years of solitary work had shaped this place into something that was entirely hers. Clara paused at the rough-hewn table to touch her husband's pocket watch. The timepiece had stopped at 9:47 on the morning Harold Winters had died in the Silver Creek mine collapse. She had never wound it again, as if letting it tick forward would somehow be a betrayal. "Not much of a husband, were you, Harold?" she murmured, her voice neither bitter nor fond. She had been 20 when her father had arranged her marriage to the 40-year-old widower. Harold had needed a housekeeper more than a wife, and Clara had needed security after her father's business failures. 5 years of dutiful cooking, cleaning, and lying beneath him when required had ended with his death. Not once had he looked at her with genuine love. Clara lifted her gaze to the eastern hills, where thin wisps of smoke rose from the Apache settlement. They had been there for generations before the white settlers arrived, yet the townsfolk spoke of them as intruders. The territorial authority maintained an uneasy peace, but whispers of relocation orders haunted every conversation about the tribe. She had first spotted Shadow Wolf 3 months ago, a tall figure on horseback watching the settlement from the ridge. Something in his solitary vigil had resonated with her own isolation. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Mrs. Bennett from the general store stood on her porch, a basket of supplies in her arms. "Thought you might need some things before winter sets in," the shopkeeper said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Clara recognized the pity beneath the kindness. "You rode all this way to deliver supplies?" Clara asked, suspicious of unexpected charity. "Well," Mrs. Bennett hesitated. "Mr. Reynolds asked after you in town yesterday. I think he was hoping to find you there." Clara suppressed a sigh. Horace Reynolds, a widower like herself, had been making awkward advances for nearly 2 years, a decent man, but his eyes held the same look Harold's had, seeking a housekeeper, not a partner. "Please tell Mr. Reynolds I'm quite well on my own," Clara said, accepting the basket with a polite nod. After Mrs. Bennett departed, Clara sat again on her porch, watching the distant Apache settlement. Something about their separate existence, neither accepted nor truly free, mirrored her own position in Copper Springs society, respected for her resilience, yet pitied for her solitude, never fully embraced. As dusk approached, she caught a glimpse of movement near the property line. Shadow Wolf, his silhouette unmistakable even at a distance. He had been watching her homestead again, as he had increasingly often these past weeks. Clara should have felt fear. Instead, she felt a curious flutter in her chest that she hadn't experienced in decades. Perhaps tomorrow, she thought, she would acknowledge his presence with a wave. For the first time in 20 years, Clara wound Harold's pocket watch. Its gentle ticking accompanied her into the night. Shadow Wolf moved silently through the juniper trees, the medicine pouch at his waist, swinging gently against his hip. Inside lay treasures few had ever seen, an eagle feather gifted by his father, a smooth river stone from his childhood, dried herbs gathered under the full moon, and a small braid of his wife's hair, all that remained of Morning Star. He paused at the ridge overlooking both worlds behind him, the Apache settlement nestled in the protective embrace of the hills. Before him scattered homesteads of the white settlers, with Clara Winter's adobe house standing apart from the others. 5 summers had passed since Morning Star had died, bringing their son into the world, the child following his mother into the spirit realm before drawing his first breath. Shadow Wolf had carried his grief like the medicine pouch, close to his heart, yet hidden from view. The tribal elders had suggested new marriages, but he had declined. His position as a scout and occasional interpreter for the territorial authorities kept him apart, a man between 2 worlds. The scouts report more soldiers arriving at Fort Kimball, came a voice behind him. Tall Pine, his oldest friend, approached with concern etched on his weathered face. The Indian agent spoke of new policies. Shadow Wolf replied, "I am to meet with him tomorrow. They speak with forked tongues," Tall Pine said bitterly. Each agreement smaller than the last, each promise broken faster than the one before. Shadow Wolf nodded. As one of the few Apache who spoke fluent English, he had witnessed the casual dismissal of treaty rights, the constant pressure to surrender more land. "The woman lives alone," Tall Pine observed, following Shadow Wolf's gaze toward Clara's homestead. "Her husband died in the mines many seasons ago," Shadow Wolf replied, "perhaps too quickly." Tall Pine's eyes narrowed. "You have watched her." "I have watched all the settlers," Shadow Wolf corrected, though he couldn't deny his particular interest in Clara Winters. Something in her solitary existence called to him. Unlike other white women who moved in nervous clusters whenever Apache men were near, Clara stood her ground, her eyes direct and unafraid. "My aunt says you carry your grief too long," Tall Pine said. "Morning Star would want you to find happiness." Shadow Wolf touched his medicine pouch. "Some things cannot be replaced." "Not replaced," Tall Pine said, "but perhaps honored by living fully again." Later that evening, Shadow Wolf sat with his aunt, the tribe's medicine woman, as she sorted herbs by firelight. "You cross to the ridge each day," she observed, her fingers never pausing in their work. "The spirits say you seek something." "I watch for threats to our people," he replied. She chuckled, the sound like dry leaves rustling. "The spirits do not lie, nephew. They say your heart awakens, like land after winter." Shadow Wolf started to deny it, then stopped. His aunt's wisdom ran too deep for falsehoods. "She is white," he said simply. "And you are Apache," she replied. "The world tells us this makes you enemies." She tied a bundle of sage and handed it to him. "But the world has been wrong before." That night, Shadow Wolf dreamed of Clara Winters standing at her fence line, her hand extended toward him. In his medicine pouch, he felt the small carving he had been working on for weeks, a tiny horse from cedar wood. Tomorrow, perhaps, he would find the courage to approach her gate. "What would you say to me, Clara Winters?" he whispered to the stars. "What words hide behind your watchful eyes?" Copper Springs bustled with its monthly market day activity as Clara guided her wagon down the dusty main street. The town had grown in recent years, boasting nearly 500 souls, a testament to the copper mine that gave the settlement both its name and purpose. Clara drew her wagon to a halt outside Bennett's General Store, mentally reviewing her supply list. The town notice board beside the store entrance caught her eye. Nestled among advertisements for cattle auctions and land sales was a new territorial proclamation regarding Indian movements and restrictions. Clara frowned as she scanned the official language that thinly veiled the government's intentions to further restrict Apache freedom. "Mrs. Winters, what a pleasure," came the booming voice of Horace Reynolds. The portly widower appeared beside her wagon, his hat already in his hands. "Allow me to assist you." Clara suppressed a sigh. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds, but I can manage." "Nonsense," he insisted, offering his hand. "A lady shouldn't handle such burdens alone."
The word alone carried the weight of suggestion. Clara had come to recognize all too well. She accepted his assistance with practiced politeness, noting how his touch lingered a moment too long. Inside the store, Eliza Bennet greeted Clara warmly. Unlike most townspeople who offered Clara either pity or suspicion, Mrs. Bennet treated her with genuine respect. "Clara, darling," she said, lowering her voice. "Sheriff Adams was asking about you yesterday. Something about seeing smoke from your property at odd hours." Clara stiffened. "My chimney works perfectly fine, Eliza." "Of course it does," Mrs. Bennet replied with meaning. "I simply thought you should know." As Clara selected her supplies, she overheard conversations that halted abruptly upon noticing her presence. 20 years of widowhood had taught her to recognize when she was the subject of town gossip. "Lives out there all alone, right near the Apache camp. Unnatural for a woman her age. Reynolds has been calling, but she won't have him." Clara held her head high. Let them talk. Their lives of quiet desperation behind lace curtains held no appeal for her. "Mrs. Winters," Sheriff Adams's voice cut through her thoughts. He stood blocking her path, thumbs hooked in his belt near his pistol, a habitual stance meant to intimidate. "Been meaning to ride out your way. Something I can help you with, Sheriff?" Clara asked coolly. "Just keeping an eye on our more isolated residents," he replied. "Especially with the Apache growing restless. Especially with the Apache growing restless. The Apache have been perfectly peaceful," Clara countered.
Perhaps if the territorial authorities honored their agreements. Careful, Mrs. Winters, the sheriff cut in. "Some might question where your sympathies lie. With justice, Sheriff Adams, always with justice." The lawman's eyes narrowed. "Justice is what I uphold in Copper Springs. Don't forget that." As he walked away, Clara noticed several townspeople watching the exchange with uncomfortable expressions. The sheriff's growing influence troubled her. "Don't mind him," came a gentle voice. Clara turned to find Reverend Simmons, the young pastor who had arrived last spring. "Sheriff Adams sees threats where there are none. He sees opportunities for power," Clara replied quietly. "And the Apache make convenient targets." The Reverend nodded thoughtfully. "You know them better than most, living out that way." Clara hesitated, suddenly wary. "I know they wish to be left in peace, as do I." Later, as Clara loaded her supplies, Mr. Reynolds reappeared with an eager smile. "I've acquired a fine cut of beef for Sunday dinner, Mrs. Winters. Perhaps you might join me. A woman alone shouldn't have to cook for herself every evening." Before Clara could formulate a polite refusal, Sheriff Adams passed by, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "Yes, Mrs. Winters, might be safer in town these days. Never know what kind of savages might come calling at an isolated homestead." Clara's hands tightened on the wagon reins. "Thank you for your concern, gentlemen, but I've managed quite well on my own these 20 years. As she drove out of town, Clara couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The notice board's proclamation, the sheriff's warning, the town's whispers, all pointed to growing tensions. For the first time, she found herself concerned not for her own safety, but for Shadow Wolf and his people. The thought surprised her. When had the mysterious Apache become someone she worried about? She hadn't even spoken to him. Not truly. Yet something about him occupied her thoughts with increasing frequency. Clara touched her husband's pocket watch, now ticking steadily at her waist. Time moved forward, whether one wished it to or not. The irrigation channel had broken again. Clara wiped sweat from her brow as she struggled with the wooden sluice gate, her garden tools scattered around her. Without proper water flow, her vegetable garden would wither in the merciless New Mexico sun. "This soil is too sandy," she muttered, jabbing her spade into the earth. 20 years of coaxing life from this land had taught her persistence, but some days the elements seemed determined to defeat her. Lost in her frustration, Clara didn't notice the approach of a visitor until a shadow fell across her work. She looked up, startled, to find Shadow Wolf standing a respectful distance away. His presence outside her fence was no longer unusual. She had grown accustomed to his occasional appearances over the past weeks, but he had never come this close before. Clara straightened, one hand instinctively reaching for the kitchen knife tucked in her apron. Then she saw what he carried, several long straight branches, and what appeared to be strips of rawhide. "Your water gate breaks," he said, his English careful but clear. "These will help." Clara hesitated. Accepting help from an Apache man would fuel the town's suspicions, yet pride seemed foolish when her crops hung in the balance. "Do you know about irrigation?" she asked, lowering her hand from the knife. Shadow Wolf nodded. "My people have farmed these valleys for many generations." "Then, yes, I would appreciate the help." He worked methodically, showing her how to reinforce the gate with a crosshatch pattern of branches bound with rawhide that would flex rather than break under pressure. Clara found herself impressed by his craftsmanship. "You speak English very well," she ventured, as they worked. "I translate for my people when the army or Indian agents come," he replied. "It is important to understand the words behind their words." "The real meaning behind false promises," Clara said, surprising herself with her boldness. Shadow Wolf's eyes met hers, a flicker of surprise in their depths. "Yes, exactly this." As the afternoon progressed, Clara learned that Shadow Wolf had been educated at a government school as a child before returning to his tribe. He spoke not only English and Apache, but some Spanish as well. He had served as a scout for the army during campaigns against hostile tribes further west, which had earned his people some temporary goodwill from the territorial authorities. "Yet they still post notices about restricting your movements," Clara said, recalling the proclamation in town. "They fear what they do not understand," Shadow Wolf replied. "And fear makes men dangerous." When the irrigation gate was repaired, Clara found herself reluctant to end their conversation. "Would you care for some coffee, as thanks for your help?" Shadow Wolf seemed startled by the invitation, then nodded. "I would like this." Inside her home, Clara became acutely aware of how unusual the situation was. An Apache warrior sitting at her kitchen table while she prepared coffee. What would the townspeople say? What would Harold have thought? The latter question made her smile slightly. Harold would have been concerned only about whether it affected his dinner time. "You live alone long time," Shadow Wolf observed, looking at the simple but well-kept interior. 20 years, Clara confirmed, placing a cup before him. "My husband died in a mining accident. My wife died 5 summers ago," Shadow Wolf said quietly, "in childbirth. The baby also." The simple statement of loss created an unexpected bridge between them. Clara found herself sharing the truth about her arranged marriage, her relief mingled with guilt when Harold died, and her determined self-sufficiency afterward. "The town thinks I should remarry," she said. "They find it unnatural for a woman to prefer her own company." "My people also," Shadow Wolf admitted. "The elders say a man should not be alone." "And what do you say?" Clara asked. His eyes met hers. "I say there is difference between being alone and being lonely." The insight startled her. "Yes, exactly that." As Shadow Wolf prepared to leave, he reached into a small pouch at his waist and withdrew a bundle of dried herbs. "For your hands," he explained. "Make tea, then soak. Will help with pain." Clara looked down at her work-roughened hands, the joints slightly swollen with early arthritis. She hadn't mentioned her pain, but he had noticed. "Tomorrow I return to check the water gate," he said, pausing at her door. "I would welcome that," Clara replied, surprising herself with her honesty. After he left, Clara stood on her porch watching his figure recede toward the distant hills. Something had shifted between them. A connection formed through shared work and mutual recognition of each other's solitude. That night, as she soaked her hands in the herbal infusion he had provided, Clara realized she had confessed more to Shadow Wolf in one afternoon than she had to anyone in Copper Springs in 20 years. The herbs worked remarkably well, easing the stiffness in her joints, but it was the ease she had felt in his presence that troubled her dreams. "I've never been loved," she had told the Apache warrior. "Not truly." The words echoed in her mind as she drifted to sleep, along with the memory of his understanding eyes. For the first time in decades, Clara Winters wondered what it might be like to be truly seen, and perhaps someday truly loved. Clara placed her usual order at Bennett's General Store: flour, sugar, coffee beans, and a few small luxuries that made her solitary life more bearable. But today, she hesitated before adding, "And another pound of coffee, if you please." Eliza Bennett's eyebrows rose slightly as she measured the additional beans. Planning on company, Clara? The question seemed innocent enough, but Clara recognized the careful curiosity behind it. News traveled fast in Copper Springs, and additional coffee meant additional cups to fill. "Just stocking up before winter," Clara replied casually. "The last snow caught me unprepared last year." "It's only September," Eliza noted, wrapping the purchases. "But prudence is a virtue, I suppose." Clara paid for her goods, aware of Eliza's speculative gaze. Their friendship, while genuine, existed within the constraints of small-town propriety. Any deviation from Clara's established patterns would spark questions. "Mrs. Winters," the booming voice of Horace Reynolds interrupted her thoughts. The widower approached with his usual eager smile. "I was hoping to catch you in town today, Mr. Reynolds," Clara acknowledged, with a polite nod. "I'm afraid I can't stay long." A polite nod. "I'm afraid I can't stay long. There's rain coming, and I need to get back before it starts." "Perhaps I could escort you," he suggested, eyeing her purchases. "That seems quite a lot for a lady to manage alone." Before Clara could decline, Sheriff Adams sauntered over, his logbook tucked under one arm. The leather-bound volume contained his official records of incidents in the county, a document Clara knew. In the county, a new included a disproportionate number of entries regarding Apache suspicious activities. "Mrs. Winters," the sheriff said, touching the brim of his hat. "Buying extra supplies, I see." Clara stiffened at this pointed observation. "Just being platoon for observation. Just being platoon timing," he continued, flipping open his logbook. "I've had reports of increased movement around your property, specifically Apache movement." The store fell quiet, neighboring conversations halting as attention shifted to their exchange. Clara felt heat rising in her feet. Rows of stains, a first to the taste drink. Clara felt heat rising at her spurs, say the town buffer for weeks. "The Apache had every right to travel their traditional lands," she said evenly. "Perhaps," the sheriff conceded with a cold smile. "But when they start playing spares with us to isolate homestead, Osídek particulate, espironic bonds, particulate, personate, limited onwards, village, becomlet, later. Mr. Reynolds puffed up indignantly. "This is precisely my concern, Clara. Your situation out there isn't safe. A woman alone—" "I am hardly vulnerable, Mr. Reynolds," Clara interrupted. "And I've managed my situations quite successfully for 20 years. Sheriff Adams tapped his logbook meaningfully. "All the same, I'll be increasing patrols in your area, for your protection, of course." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air. Clara gathered her purchases with deliberate calm. "Thank you for your concern, gentlemen. If you'll excuse me, I have a long ride home." As she loaded her wagon, Clara felt the weight of watchful eyes from the town windows. Her interaction with Shadow Wolf, innocent as it was, had clearly been noticed and reported. The sheriff's warning was clear. Her association with an Apache man would not be tolerated. The rain began as Clara left town, fat droplets spattering the dusty road. She urged her horse faster, troubled by the confrontation. She had done nothing wrong, yet she felt branded by the town's suspicion. More concerning was the thought of increased patrols near her property. Would Shadow Wolf be in danger if he continued to visit? The question troubled her more than it should have. Their conversations over the past 2 weeks had become the brightest points in her otherwise solitary existence. They had repaired her irrigation system together, exchanged knowledge of medicinal plants, and shared quiet evenings on her porch, watching the sunset. Nothing improper had occurred, yet Clara knew the town would see any relationship between them as a transgression. As she approached her homestead, the rain now falling steadily, Clara noticed something white affixed to her door. Securing her horse, she hurried to investigate and found a folded piece of paper nailed to the wood. The rain had smeared the ink, but the message remained legible. White women who lie with Indians are no better than savages. Copper Springs protects its own. Clara tore the note down, her hands trembling with rage more than fear. The crude threat confirmed her suspicions. Someone had been watching her property, witnessing Shadow Wolf's visits. Later that evening, as she sat by her fire, Clara heard a soft knock at her door. Shadow Wolf stood on her porch, rain dripping from his long hair. "I saw lights," he said simply. "Wanted to make sure you returned safely." Clara hesitated, then stepped aside to let him enter. After a moment's deliberation, she showed him the threatening note. Shadow Wolf's expression darkened as he read it. "This is dangerous for you." "For both of us," Clara corrected. He met her eyes. "I should not come here anymore." The prospect of returning to her isolated existence sent an unexpected pang through Clara's heart. "Is that what you want?" "What I want," Shadow Wolf said carefully, "and what is safe are different things." Clara straightened her shoulders, a decision forming. "I've spent 20 years living as others thought I should. I won't be threatened into solitude again." Shadow Wolf studied her face, seeming to measure her resolve. "The town sheriff, he watches your land now. He's increasing patrols," Clara confirmed. "We'll need to be more careful, but," she took a deep breath, "I would still welcome your visits, if you wish to come." A slight smile touched Shadow Wolf's lips. "Then I will find ways to come that even the sheriff cannot see." As he left into the rainy night, Clara locked her door and leaned against it, heart racing with a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in decades, she was choosing her own path, regardless of consequences. The realization was both terrifying and oddly liberating. The steady clip-clop of an approaching horse drew Clara from her gardening. Shielding her eyes against the morning sun, she recognized Sheriff Adams's imposing figure astride his chestnut gelding. Her stomach tightened as she wiped soil from her hands and prepared to meet him at the fence line. "Sheriff," she greeted him coolly, "what brings you all the way out here?" Sheriff Adams dismounted with deliberate slowness, his eyes scanning her property. "Just doing my rounds, Mrs. Winters, checking on our more isolated residents." Clara noted how he emphasized the word isolated, a reminder of her vulnerability. "As you can see, I'm perfectly fine." The sheriff hooked his thumbs in his belt, near his holstered pistol. "Heard some interesting reports lately. Seems there's been unusual activity around your property." His voice hardened. "Apache activity." "The Apache have every right to travel their traditional lands," Clara replied, repeating her statement from town. "Travel, yes," the sheriff countered. "Spending hours at a white woman's homestead, that's another matter entirely." Clara felt heat rising in her cheeks. "I wasn't aware my visitors required your approval, Sheriff." "When those visitors pose a threat to public safety, they certainly do." "There's been no threat to my safety," Clara said firmly. Sheriff Adams' eyes narrowed. "Perhaps you're unaware of the reputation of these savages. The territorial papers are full of accounts, exaggerated accounts written by those who profit from conflict." Clara interrupted. "I judge people by their actions, not by tales meant to frighten children." "You're being naive, Mrs. Winters," the sheriff said, his voice dropping to a dangerous softness. "Or perhaps deliberately obtuse. Either way, I'd hate to see anything unfortunate happen to you out here, all alone." The threat hung in the air between them. Clara straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly. "Is that an expression of concern, Sheriff, or a warning of a different kind?" A cold smile touched his lips. "Just doing my duty to protect the good people of this county, all of them." "Then I suggest you look elsewhere for threats," Clara replied. "There are none here." After the sheriff departed, Clara's hands trembled as she returned to her garden. His visit had been a clear warning, one she couldn't ignore. Yet the thought of ending her friendship with Shadow Wolf sent an unexpected pain through her chest. That evening, Clara found another note nailed to her door. Unlike the first, this one was official, with the territorial seal stamped at the bottom. Notice: all citizens are hereby warned against unauthorized contact with Indians outside designated meeting areas. Those disregarding this notice may be subject to fines or detention under Territorial Code 29B. Clara tore the notice down, crumpling it in her fist. The law they cited was meant to prevent illegal trading of weapons and liquor, not to forbid simple human interaction. The sheriff was twisting regulations to suit his purpose. The sound of footsteps behind her caused Clara to whirl around, heart pounding. Shadow Wolf emerged from the shadows, his expression grim. "You returned early," she said, relief washing over her. "I saw the sheriff ride away," he explained. "I was concerned." Clara showed him the crumpled notice. "They're using the law against us now." Shadow Wolf's jaw tightened as he read it. "The meeting at Fort Kimball. New restrictions are coming. The agent spoke of protecting white settlements by limiting our movements further." "This isn't about protection," Clara said bitterly. "It's about control." They sat on her porch as twilight deepened into night, discussing the implications of these developments. The territorial authorities were systematically reducing Apache freedoms, while the sheriff was determined to isolate Clara from Shadow Wolf. "Perhaps it would be safer if I stayed away," Shadow Wolf suggested, though his voice carried reluctance. Clara found herself reaching for his hand before she could consider the impropriety. His skin was warm and calloused against hers. "I won't be intimidated into isolation again," she said firmly. "Not by the sheriff, not by anonymous threats." Shadow Wolf looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. "Clara Winters," he said softly, "you have the spirit of a warrior." His words warmed something long dormant within her. For 20 years she had merely survived. Now, defending this unexpected friendship, she felt truly alive. "The medicine woman, my aunt, still wishes to meet you," Shadow Wolf said. "Tomorrow, if you are willing." Clara nodded, aware that this step would deepen their connection in ways that would be difficult to hide or deny. "I would be honored." As Shadow Wolf prepared to leave, he paused at the edge of her porch. "Be watchful, Clara. The sheriff is a dangerous man when challenged." "I've faced dangerous men before," she replied, "and I'm still here." Shadow Wolf's smile was brief but genuine. "Yes, you are still here, like the mountain that remains after the storm has passed." Long after he disappeared into the darkness, Clara remained on her porch, her hand still warm from his touch, her mind filled with possibilities she had never dared to consider before. The Apache settlement lay nestled in a protected valley, a collection of traditional wickiups and more modern canvas tents arranged in a circular pattern. Clara followed Shadow Wolf along a narrow trail, her heart quickening with each step. This crossing of boundaries felt significant. She was no longer merely receiving an Apache visitor, but entering their world. "My aunt is respected among our people," Shadow Wolf explained as they approached. "She knows the old ways of healing and speaks with the ancestors." Clara nodded, adjusting the small bundle of European herbs she had brought as a gift. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "What if she disapproves of me?" Shadow Wolf glanced back with a reassuring expression. "She is wise. She sees with more than her eyes." As they entered the settlement, Clara felt the weight of curious stares. Children paused in their play, women looked up from their work, and men observed with guarded expressions. She was likely the first white woman many of them had seen up close outside of towns or trading posts. Shadow Wolf led her to a wickiup, slightly larger than the others, adorned with painted symbols similar to those on his flute. "Aunt," he called softly, "I have brought the herb woman." An elderly woman emerged, her face a map of deep lines that spoke of both laughter and hardship. Despite her advanced age, she moved with surprising grace. Around her shoulders lay a beautifully crafted blanket with geometric patterns in earth tones and deep blue. "So," the medicine woman said in Apache, looking Clara up and down, This is the white woman who has captured my nephew's attention. Shadow Wolf translated, though Clara suspected he softened the words somewhat. Tell her, I am honored to meet her, Clara replied, offering her bundle of herbs. I've brought some plants from my garden that might interest her. The medicine woman accepted the gift with a non-committal nod, then gestured for Clara to enter her dwelling. Inside, bundles of drying herbs hung from the supports, and various pouches and containers lined the walls. The smell reminded Clara of her grandmother's workroom, earthy, aromatic, and somehow timeless. For the next hour, with Shadow Wolf translating, the two women compared their knowledge of healing plants. Clara described the properties of chamomile, valerian, and other European herbs, while the medicine woman shared her wisdom regarding local plants. Despite the language barrier, they developed a rhythm of communication enhanced by their shared understanding of healing. She says your hands know the plants. Shadow Wolf translated as his aunt made a comment while watching Clara examine a root. This is a rare compliment. Clara smiled, pleased by the acknowledgement. Tell her my grandmother taught me that plants speak to those who listen properly. When Shadow Wolf relayed this, the medicine woman's expression changed subtly. She studied Clara more intently, then spoke at length to her nephew. What did she say? Clara asked when the exchange continued without translation. Shadow Wolf seemed hesitant. She says you have a spirit that does not match your skin, that perhaps in another life you were of our people. The medicine woman rose and retrieved something from a cedar box, a small blanket, finely woven with symbols similar to those on her own larger one. This is a healing blanket, Shadow Wolf explained as his aunt presented it to Clara. It is given to those who are sick, or those who are welcomed as family. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the gift. I don't know what to say. This is too generous. The medicine woman spoke again, her eyes never leaving Clara's face. She says the blanket chooses who it protects, Shadow Wolf translated, and that you walk between two worlds, as I do. He paused, seeming to decide whether to translate the next part. She also says your heart has been asleep for many winters, but now awakens. Heat rose to Clara's cheeks at these words. The medicine woman's perception was uncomfortably accurate. As they prepared to leave, the elderly woman took Clara's hands in her own. Her grip was surprisingly strong as she spoke directly to Clara, as if certain her meaning would transcend language. She says you must be careful, Shadow Wolf translated, his voice low. Hatred grows when love crosses boundaries. Outside the wickiup, several Apache children had gathered, watching Clara with undisguised curiosity. One small girl approached boldly, touching Clara's skirt with wonder. She has never seen fabric like this, Shadow Wolf explained. Clara smiled and knelt to the child's level, showing her the embroidery on her cuff. The girl's delight at this simple interaction seemed to ease the tension among the onlookers. Soon several women approached, asking questions through Shadow Wolf about Clara's clothing, her homestead, and her life as a woman living alone. As the sun began its descent, Shadow Wolf guided Clara back toward her property. My aunt rarely gives such gifts, he said, nodding to the healing blanket she carried carefully. She sees something in you, something I'm not sure I see in myself, Clara admitted. Shadow Wolf stopped on the trail, turning to face her. The Apache believe that others sometimes recognize our true spirit before we do. His eyes held hers. My aunt sees what I have seen since our first meeting. And what is that? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Strength, he replied simply, and a heart that matches mine, though our worlds are different. The directness of his words left Clara momentarily speechless. In her world, such feelings remained veiled behind propriety and suggestion. Shadow Wolf's honesty was both terrifying and exhilarating. As they crested the hill overlooking her homestead, Clara was struck by how different it looked from this new perspective, small and somewhat isolated against the vast landscape. For 20 years that homestead had been her entire world. Now suddenly it seemed just one small part of a much larger possibility. "Thank you," she said finally, "for taking me to meet your aunt, for trusting me with your people." Shadow Wolf nodded, his expression serious. "Two worlds can meet without one destroying the other. This is what I believe." As Clara clutched the healing blanket to her chest, she found herself sharing that belief and hoping that the world around them would allow it to become reality. The arrival of Territorial Officer James Brooks and his military escort sent ripples of tension through Copper Springs. Clara watched from the periphery of the crowded town square as the officer, resplendent in his formal uniform, unfolded an official-looking document on the steps of the newly constructed courthouse. By order of the territorial governor, Brooks announced to the gathered townspeople, "New regulations regarding Indian movements and activities are hereby enacted." Clara's stomach tightened as she scanned the crowd, noting Sheriff Adams's satisfied expression. Near the back of the gathering, almost hidden in the shadow of the livery stable, stood Shadow Wolf. Their eyes met briefly, his expression guarded. "All Indians must now carry proper documentation when traveling beyond their designated areas," Officer Brooks continued, his voice carrying across the square. "Curfews will be strictly enforced. Any Indians found outside permitted zones after sundown will be detained." Murmurs of approval rose from many townspeople. Clara felt sick as Brooks continued listing increasingly restrictive measures, limitations on trade, gatherings, and movement that would further strangle Apache autonomy. These measures, Brooks concluded with bureaucratic precision, offer the protection of all territorial citizens and the maintenance of proper order. As the crowd began to disperse, Clara noticed Officer Brooks gesturing to Shadow Wolf. She edged closer, trying to appear casual as she examined goods at the nearby mercantile stall. "You'll translate these regulations for your people," Brooks was saying, handing Shadow Wolf a rolled document. "Ensure they understand the consequences of non-compliance." Shadow Wolf's face remained impassive as he accepted the document. "My people understand consequences very well, Officer Brooks. We have experienced many from the government's promises." The territorial officer's expression hardened. "Mind your tone. Your position as interpreter is a privilege that can be revoked." "A privilege?" Sheriff Adams interjected, joining the conversation. "More like an opportunity for mischief. Who knows what he actually tells his people when he translates?" "I speak truth in both languages," Shadow Wolf replied evenly, "unlike some who speak differently depending on who listens." The sheriff stepped closer, one hand resting on his pistol. "You calling me a liar, boy?" Clara couldn't remain silent any longer. "He's calling you inconsistent, Sheriff," she said, moving forward. "And I'd have to agree, based on how differently you speak to me when we're alone versus in public company." All three men turned to her with varying expressions of surprise. Officer Brooks recovered first, offering a stiff bow. "Mrs. Winters, I presume Sheriff Adams has mentioned you." "I'm sure he has," Clara replied coolly, "though I doubt his descriptions were entirely accurate." Shadow Wolf's eyes held a warning, but Clara had endured enough of the sheriff's intimidation tactics. Officer Brooks studied her with newfound interest. "I understand you live quite near the Apache settlement. Have you experienced any difficulties with your neighbors?" "None whatsoever," Clara stated firmly. "In fact, I've found them to be more honorable than many who claim civilization." The territorial officer's eyebrows rose. "A charitable view, madam, though perhaps naive." "Not naive, sir. Experience-based," Clara countered. "I've lived alongside the Apache for 20 years without incident. These new restrictions seem designed to solve problems that don't exist." Sheriff Adams stepped forward. "Mrs. Winters has developed some unusual sympathies of late, perhaps even inappropriate relationships." The implication hung in the air. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but refused to be shamed. "My relationships are my own concern, Sheriff," she said evenly. "As are my sympathies." Officer Brooks looked between them with growing comprehension. "I see," he said carefully. Mrs. Winters, while your frontier independence is admirable, I must caution you that these regulations apply to all citizens. Harboring or assisting Indians in circumventing these rules would constitute a serious offense. Before Clara could respond, one of Brooks's soldiers approached and whispered something in his ear. The officer nodded and turned back to the group. If you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to. He fixed Shadow Wolf with a stern gaze. I expect those regulations to be properly communicated to your people by tomorrow. As Brooks departed with his escort, Sheriff Adams leaned closer to Clara. You're choosing a dangerous path, Mrs. Winters, one that could cost you everything. Is that a prediction or a threat, Sheriff? Clara asked quietly. Consider it friendly advice, he replied with a cold smile before walking away. Shadow Wolf waited until the sheriff was out of earshot before speaking. You should not have confronted them, he said, concern evident in his voice. The territorial officer has power to seize land, to arrest without cause. And should I have stood silent while they discussed you as if you weren't present? Clara asked. While they implemented rules designed to break your people. Shadow Wolf glanced at the treaty document in his hands. These papers are just new words for old intentions. They have always wanted us gone or controlled. What will you do? Clara asked. Tell my people the truth, he replied simply, that the noose tightens further. As they parted in the town square, conscious of watchful eyes, Clara was struck by the widening gulf between the world they inhabited and the connection they shared across it. The territorial document Shadow Wolf carried represented everything designed to keep them apart. Laws, prejudices, and power structures built on fear and control. That evening, alone on her porch, Clara unfolded the healing blanket given to her by Shadow Wolf's aunt. Its geometric patterns seemed to hold a message she was still learning to read, a language of resilience and survival that had sustained the Apache through generations of broken promises and stolen lands. Running her fingers over the tightly woven fabric, Clara made a decision. If the world was determined to separate them, she would be equally determined to find a path forward together, whatever the cost. The mesa glowed crimson in the setting sun as Clara spread a simple meal on the flat stone that had become their meeting place. Hidden from the main trails and sheltered by juniper trees, this outcropping offered both privacy and a sweeping view that would reveal any approaching riders. Shadow Wolf arrived as the first stars appeared, his approach silent despite the rocky terrain. In his hand he carried a small leather pouch. I was beginning to worry, Clara said, relief evident in her voice. The soldiers watched the usual paths, he explained, settling beside her. I had to travel the long way through the high canyon. They ate in comfortable silence, sharing bread, dried venison, and late-season berries Clara had preserved. These shared meals had become a cherished ritual over the past weeks, away from prying eyes and the increasing tensions in both town and settlement. How are your people responding to the new restrictions? Clara asked finally. Shadow Wolf's expression darkened. Some wish to fight, others to flee further west. The elders counsel patience, but patience grows thin when children go hungry, because we cannot hunt in our traditional grounds. And your aunt, what does she say? She speaks of change coming like a storm, he replied, one that will either destroy or cleanse. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter against the evening chill. The town is changing too. People who once nodded to me in greeting now look away. Mrs. Bennett warned me that some are calling for the sheriff to investigate me formally. For what crime? Shadow Wolf asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. For consorting with the enemy, Clara said with a bitter smile. Though they use cruder terms, Shadow Wolf was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening landscape. Perhaps I should not come anymore. Is that what you want? Clara asked, her heart constricting at the thought. What I want, he began, then stopped, choosing his words carefully. What I want has not mattered since the white man's government
decided our fate. It matters to me, Clara said softly. Shadow Wolf turned to face her fully, his dark eyes reflecting the first evening stars. Then I will tell you what I want, Clara Winters. He reached for her hand, his touch sending warmth through her despite the cool evening. I want to see your face each day as the sun rises. I want to share stories and silence with you without fear. I want to know if the feeling in my heart lives in yours as well. The directness of his words left Clara breathless. In her world such sentiments remained veiled behind propriety and suggestion. Shadow Wolf's honesty was both terrifying and exhilarating. I've never spoken this way to anyone, she admitted. In my marriage there were no words of love, no sharing of hearts. Then your husband was a fool, Shadow Wolf said simply. Clara looked down at their joined hands. His name was Harold. He died in a mining accident, after 5 years of marriage. He was kind enough in his way, but he married me for convenience, not love. My wife's name was Morning Star, Shadow Wolf said, the words emerging as if from a deep well of memory. She died bringing our son into the world. The child did not live either. You've never told me her name before, Clara said softly. Among my people we do not speak the names of the dead easily, he explained. But tonight I wanted you to know her. The intimacy of this sharing, this gift of his private grief, moved Clara deeply. Tell me about her. Shadow Wolf described Morning Star's love, her skill with beadwork, her fierce protection of their traditions.
As he spoke, Clara felt not jealousy but a strange connection to this woman she would never meet, who had been loved by the man now holding her hand beneath the stars. She would have liked your strength, he concluded, and your healing knowledge. My husband would have been scandalized by all of this, Clara said with a small laugh. He believed women should be quietly obedient and predictable. Then we are fortunate he is not here, Shadow Wolf replied with a slight smile. Clara found herself laughing genuinely, perhaps for the first time in years. The sound echoed across the mesa, free and unexpected. As their laughter faded, a new silence fell between them, charged with unspoken possibility. Shadow Wolf reached into his pouch and withdrew something that caught the moonlight. An eagle feather, Clara whispered, recognizing the sacred object. My father gave this to me when I became a man, Shadow Wolf explained. It is one of my most valued possessions. He held it out to her. I want you to have it. Clara's eyes widened. I can't accept this. It's too important. That is why I wish you to have it, he said simply. Among my people, such a gift has meaning. What meaning? Clara asked, her voice barely audible. That I offer my protection, my respect and my heart, Shadow Wolf replied, his gaze steady on hers. Clara's hand trembled as she accepted the feather. In her 20 years of widowhood, she had built walls of independence and solitude. Now, with this simple gesture, Shadow Wolf was asking permission to cross those boundaries. I don't know the proper response, she admitted. There are no proper words between hearts, he said. Only truth. Clara looked down at the eagle feather, then back to Shadow Wolf's face, illuminated in the silver moonlight. The truth is, I've never felt for anyone what I feel when I'm with you. It frightens me how much I look forward to seeing you, how empty the days feel when you're gone. Shadow Wolf's hand gently covered hers, the eagle feather between their palms. Then we are on the same path, Clara Winters. As the moon climbed higher, they sat side by side, shoulders touching, hands entwined. The simple contact seemed more intimate than anything Clara had experienced in her marriage. They spoke of small things, childhood memories, favorite foods, dreams they had set aside, finding common ground in the universal experiences that transcended their different worlds. When it came time to part, Shadow Wolf hesitated, then slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, leaned forward and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. Until tomorrow, he whispered. Clara watched him disappear into the darkness, the eagle feather clutched to her heart, her forehead still warm from his kiss. For the first time in her adult life, she understood what it meant to be truly seen by another soul, and to see them in return. Horace Reynolds wiped sweat from his brow as he lowered his spyglass, satisfaction hardening his features. For 3 hours, he had watched from a concealed position on the ridge overlooking Clara's property. His patience had finally yielded results, irrefutable evidence of her betrayal. The Apache warrior had arrived shortly after sunset, and Clara had greeted him with obvious familiarity. Reynolds had watched, growing increasingly agitated as they shared a meal on her porch. But it was their hands clasped together, their evident intimacy, that had sent him scrambling for his horse. Sheriff Adams was playing cards at the Copper Springs saloon when Reynolds burst through the swinging doors. "She's with him right now," Reynolds announced breathlessly. "Clara and that Apache interpreter at her homestead." The sheriff placed his cards face down, his expression revealing nothing. "You sure about that, Reynolds?" "Saw them with my own eyes." Reynolds leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Sitting together holding hands, like sweethearts." A ripple of murmurs spread through the saloon as other patrons overheard. Sheriff Adams rose slowly, hooking his thumbs in his belt near his gleaming badge. "Gentlemen," he announced to the room, "seems we have a situation that requires attention. Mrs. Winters may be in danger, whether she realizes it or not." Several men nodded grimly, already reaching for their hats and coats. The sheriff's implication was clear. No white woman would willingly associate with an Apache man, unless somehow coerced or confused. "Who's with me?" the sheriff asked, though it wasn't really a question. Within 20 minutes, 8 riders galloped toward Clara's homestead, rifles gleaming in the moonlight. Sheriff Adams led the group, his face set in lines of righteous determination. Beside him, Horace Reynolds struggled to keep pace, his expression vacillating between vindication and concern. "Remember," the sheriff called over the thundering hooves, "we're protecting a white woman from Indian influence. Restrain the savage, but don't harm Mrs. Winters, unless she gives you no choice." At Clara's homestead, the evening had deepened into quiet conversation. Shadow Wolf sat beside her on the porch steps, teaching her simple phrases in Apache. Their laughter at her pronunciation attempts drifted through the still night air. The sound of approaching horses shattered their peace. Shadow Wolf was on his feet instantly, his body tensing as he scanned the darkness. "Riders," he said tersely, "many coming fast." Clara rose beside him, fear clutching at her throat. "It's too late for normal travelers." "I should go," Shadow Wolf said, already moving toward the back of the property. "No." Clara caught his arm. "Running looks like guilt. We've done nothing wrong." Before Shadow Wolf could respond, the property was suddenly flooded with torchlight as riders surrounded the house. Sheriff Adams' voice cut through the night. "Step away from the woman, Indian. Now." Clara moved forward, placing herself between Shadow Wolf and the mounted men. "What is the meaning of this, Sheriff? You have no right to come onto my property this way." "Oh, we have every right when a citizen is in danger," the sheriff replied, dismounting smoothly. "Stand aside, Mrs. Winters." "I'm in no danger," Clara said firmly. "Shadow Wolf is my guest." Reynolds pushed forward, pointing an accusatory finger. "Guest? Is that what you call it, when an Indian man comes calling after dark? When you sit together like what, Mr. Reynolds?" Clara challenged, her voice razor-sharp. "Like two people enjoying conversation, or did your imagination conjure something more scandalous, to soothe your wounded pride?" The sheriff motioned to his men, "Secure the Indian. Mrs. Winters is clearly not thinking clearly." 2 men moved forward, but Shadow Wolf stood his ground. "I have broken no law." "Trespassing," the sheriff said coldly. "Violating curfew. Interfering with a white woman." "This is my property," Clara interjected. "He's here by my invitation. There is no trespassing." The sheriff's patience visibly thinned. "Take him," he ordered his men. What followed unfolded with horrifying speed. The men rushed forward. Shadow Wolf defended himself with skilled precision, and Clara tried desperately to intervene. In the chaos, a rifle butt struck Shadow Wolf's temple, sending him to his knees. Clara's scream pierced the night as the men fell upon him, binding his wrists with brutal efficiency. "Stop this!" Clara cried, clawing at the nearest deputy. "He's done nothing wrong." Sheriff Adams seized her arms, dragging her away from the struggle. "Mrs. Winters, control yourself or I'll be forced to restrain you as well." Blood trickled down Shadow Wolf's face as the men hauled him to his feet. His eyes found Clara's, conveying both reassurance and warning. "Search the house," the sheriff ordered, still gripping Clara's arm. "Let's see what else our Apache friend has been up to." "You have no warrant," Clara protested, struggling against his hold. "Don't need one when there's suspected Indian depredation," the sheriff replied with cold satisfaction. Clara watched in helpless rage as men trampled through her home, overturning furniture and rifling through her possessions. One emerged triumphantly with the healing blanket and eagle feather. "Indian contraband," he announced. "Gifts," Clara corrected fiercely. "Not contraband." Sheriff Adams examined the items with exaggerated care. "Interesting. These match descriptions of sacred objects recently missing from the settlement. Possible theft to add to the charges." "That's a lie." Clara's voice broke with fury. "You're fabricating crimes." The sheriff leaned close, his voice dropping to ensure only she could hear. "I warned you, Clara. Now you'll learn what happens when a woman defies the natural order." Shadow Wolf, despite his bonds and the blood on his face, spoke with quiet dignity. "The blanket was a gift from my aunt. The feather is mine to give. There is no theft." "Save your lies for the judge," the sheriff replied. He turned to Reynolds, who had watched the entire scene with growing discomfort. "Mr. Reynolds, would you escort Mrs. Winters back to town? I believe she'll need somewhere safe to stay while we sort this unfortunate business." Reynolds stepped forward, his expression a mixture of concern and vindication. "Of course, Sheriff. My home is at her disposal. I'm not going anywhere," Clara stated flatly. "This is my home." Sheriff Adams' smile held no warmth. "Mrs. Winters, you're either coming to town voluntarily or in custody. Your choice." Before Clara could respond, Shadow Wolf caught her gaze. "Clara," he said quietly, "go with them. Do not give them reason to harm you." "Listen to your savage friend," the sheriff mocked. "For once he's talking sense." As the men dragged Shadow Wolf toward their horses, he managed to turn back to Clara. "Officer Brooks," he said urgently, "there is more happening than you know." "The settlement." A deputy's fist silenced him mid-sentence. "Gag him," the sheriff ordered. "I'm tired of his lies." Clara rushed forward, but was restrained by Reynolds' surprisingly strong grip. "Clara, please," he muttered. "Don't make this worse." As she watched helplessly, the men bound Shadow Wolf to a horse. The sheriff approached her one last time, his badge gleaming in the torchlight. "I'll expect you in town by morning," he said. "We'll need your statement about the Indians' inappropriate attentions. If you're not there, I'll return with a warrant for harboring and abetting." Clara's voice shook with barely controlled rage. "You won't get away with this." "I already have," the sheriff replied simply. After they departed, dragging Shadow Wolf away with them, Reynolds remained awkwardly on Clara's porch. "Clara, I didn't know they would." "Get off my property," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "I was worried about you," he protested. "Living out here alone," she protested. "Living out here alone with savages. Get off my savages. Get off my property." Each word was a bullet. When Reynolds finally departed, Clara surveyed her ransacked home with numb detachment. Books scattered, furniture overturned, her carefully preserved stores strewn across the floor. The material damage could be repaired, but Shadow Wolf's blood-stained handprint on her doorframe spoke of a deeper violation. As the shock subsided, Clara began to process Shadow Wolf's urgent final words. "Officer Brooks, the settlement, something more happening." She recalled Brooks's announcement of new restrictions, the tensions brewing in both town and settlement. Clara moved with sudden purpose, gathering supplies into a saddlebag. Shadow Wolf was now in the town jail, but his people remained vulnerable in the settlement. If there were plans against them, they needed to be warned. By midnight, she had saddled her horse and changed into her most practical riding clothes. The healing blanket, which the men had discarded as worthless after inspection, was carefully folded in her bag alongside the eagle feather. Clara took one last look at her homestead, 20 years of independence and solitude. Whether she would ever return to it as her home, she couldn't know. But for the first time in her adult life, somewhere else, someone else, mattered more. "Hold on, Shadow Wolf," she whispered to the night. "I'm coming." Copper Springs stirred to life in the grey dawn as Clara rode into town, her face set with determination beneath her wide-brimmed hat. She tied her horse outside Bennett's General Store and rapped sharply on the back door. After a moment, Eliza Bennett appeared in her nightgown, eyes widening at the sight of Clara's disheveled appearance. "Good heavens, Clara, what's happened?" "They've arrested Shadow Wolf," Clara said without preamble. "The sheriff and his men came to my property last night and took him. He's been beaten." Eliza pulled her inside quickly, glancing nervously at the street. "The whole town's talking about it already. They're saying he attacked you, that the sheriff saved you just in time." "Lies," Clara said fiercely. "He was my guest. We were simply talking when they arrived. Sheriff Adams has fabricated charges against him." Eliza studied her friend's face. "You care for him," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Clara met her gaze steadily. "Yes." To her surprise, Eliza simply nodded. "I suspected as much. The way you spoke of him, and the extra coffee," she sighed. "What do you need from me?" "Information," Clara replied. "And perhaps a message delivered to Judge Wilson. He's always been fair-minded, even with Indian cases." As they spoke in hushed tones, Eliza's husband Thomas emerged from the bedroom, fastening his suspenders. "Clara, is everything all right?" "Sheriff Adams has arrested her friend on false charges," Eliza explained succinctly. Thomas Bennett's expression darkened. "The Apache interpreter. I heard the commotion at the saloon last night. Reynolds was quite vocal about discovering improprieties." Clara's cheeks flushed with anger. There were no improprieties, but even if there had been, it would be no one's business but our own. Thomas and Eliza exchanged a glance laden with concern. "Clara," Thomas said gently, "you need to understand the dangerous ground you're treading. The sheriff has been looking for an excuse to move against the Apache settlement for months. Your friendship with Shadow Wolf has given him the perfect opportunity." "What do you mean?" Clara asked, dread growing in her stomach. "Officer Brooks arrived 3 days ago with orders regarding the Apache," Thomas explained. "I overheard Brooks and the sheriff discussing relocation plans. They're waiting for the right moment, some incident to justify military action." Clara recalled Shadow Wolf's urgent final words before being silenced. "I need to see him, to warn his people. The jail is being heavily guarded," Eliza cautioned. "And the sheriff has been telling everyone you're suffering from some kind of nervous condition, that the savage manipulated you." "That's absurd," Clara scoffed. "Perhaps," Thomas said carefully, "but it means your word alone may not be enough to help Shadow Wolf. You need leverage." Clara's hand unconsciously moved to her pocket, where her property deed was carefully folded. "Leverage," she repeated thoughtfully. An hour later, freshly changed into clothes Eliza had provided, Clara marched purposefully toward the law offices of Albert Cunningham. The lawyer was just unlocking his door when she arrived. "Mrs. Winters," he greeted her with surprise. "I've been hearing quite a lot about you this morning." "I imagine you have," Clara replied, "and most of it false. I need your legal counsel immediately." Inside his office, Clara laid out the situation without embellishment, concluding with her suspicions about plans against the Apache settlement. "This is a serious accusation," Cunningham said, steepling his fingers. "Sheriff Adams is a powerful man in this county, which is precisely why he believes he can act with impunity," Clara replied. She withdrew her property deed from her pocket and placed it on his desk. "I want you to draw up conditional transfer papers for my homestead." The lawyer's eyebrows rose. "You're selling your property." "To whom?" "To the Copper Valley Mining Company," Clara stated flatly. Cunningham sat back in shock. "The mining company? but they've been trying to buy land in your area for years. The entire town has fought against their expansion. Exactly, Clara said. My land sits on what they believe is a significant copper deposit. I've refused their offers for years, as has everyone else in the valley. But now I'm prepared to sell, conditionally. Understanding dawned in the lawyer's eyes. You're creating leverage. The town council, including Sheriff Adams, has blocked the mining company at every turn. Clara continued. But my land would give them their foothold. I want you to draw up papers specifying that the sale is conditional upon Shadow Wolf's immediate release, all charges dropped, and the abandonment of any plans against the Apache settlement. Cunningham whistled softly. That's quite a gambit, Mrs. Winters. The sheriff will be furious. Good, Clara said coldly. He should understand how it feels to be powerless. As Cunningham began drafting the documents, Clara sat by the window, watching the town square fill with morning activity. The jail was visible across the square, a squat stone building with barred windows. Somewhere inside, Shadow Wolf was being held, perhaps still bleeding from his wounds. The thought hardened her resolve. She had spent 20 years playing by society's rules, accepting limitations placed upon her as a woman alone. No more. By mid-morning, a small crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office. Clara, documents in hand, approached with Cunningham at her side. She recognized several members of the town council among the onlookers. Sheriff Adams emerged, annoyance clear on his face. Mrs. Winters, I expected you hours ago to give your statement about the Indians' behavior. I've brought a different kind of statement, Clara replied, holding up the legal papers. Conditional transfer of my property to the Copper Valley Mining Company. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Councilman Parker stepped forward, face flushed with alarm. You can't be serious, Clara. You know what that company would do to our valley. I'm completely serious, Clara stated, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. My entire property, including water rights, will be transferred to the mining company unless certain conditions are met immediately. What conditions? The sheriff demanded, eyes narrowing dangerously. First, the immediate release of Shadow Wolf, with all charges dropped, Clara began. Second, written assurance that no action will be taken against the Apache settlement. Third, compensation for the damage done to my property during your illegal search. Sheriff Adams' face darkened with fury. This is blackmail. This is negotiation, Clara corrected. Something you understand quite well, Sheriff. After all, how much has the mining company offered you over the years to look the other way? The accusation hit its mark. Several council members glanced at the sheriff with sudden suspicion. You're defending a savage over your own kind, Adams spat. Have you no shame? My shame would be in remaining silent while you abuse your authority, Clara replied evenly. Shadow Wolf has committed no crime, except crossing the boundaries you've established to maintain your power. Release him, or I sign these papers immediately. As the standoff continued, Mrs. Bennett arrived with several other women from town. We stand with Clara, she announced, positioning herself beside her friend. This has gone far enough. The sheriff looked from face to face, measuring his support. Clara could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing his hatred of Shadow Wolf against the political consequences of allowing the mining company into the valley. The Apache will be released, he finally growled, but he's banished from town limits. If he returns, I won't be responsible for what happens. And the settlement? Clara pressed. What of Officer Brooks's plans? A flicker of surprise crossed Adams's face. You know nothing about official territorial business. I know enough, Clara replied. No action against the settlement. Put it in writing, or the deal is void. For a long, tense moment, Clara thought he might refuse. Then Councilman Parker stepped forward. Write it, Sheriff. The council will witness it. He turned to Clara. We want no mining company here, Mrs. Winters. Surely we can resolve this reasonably.
As the sheriff disappeared into his office to draft the agreement, Clara felt her knees weaken with relief. Mrs. Bennet squeezed her arm supportively. "You're either the bravest or the most foolish woman I've ever known," she whispered. "Perhaps both," Clara admitted.
The legal exchange was completed on the courthouse steps, with the town council and many citizens witnessing. Clara's property remained hers, and Shadow Wolf would be released, though banished from town. As she waited outside the jail, the gravity of what she had done settled upon her. She had publicly aligned herself with Shadow Wolf against her own community. Whatever life she had known in Copper Springs was irrevocably altered. When the jail door finally opened, Shadow Wolf emerged, his face bruised, his posture proud, despite obvious pain. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and in that moment, Clara knew she would make the same choice again, without hesitation. Clara paced anxiously behind Bennett's general store, where Shadow Wolf had been taken after his release. Thomas Bennett stood guard at the back door, while his wife tended to the Apache warrior's injuries inside. The sheriff's men had not been gentle during his night in custody. "How is he?" Clara asked when Eliza emerged from the storeroom, carrying a basin of bloodied water. "They worked him over thoroughly," Eliza replied grimly. "Bruised ribs, cuts on his face, and I suspect his shoulder may be dislocated. But he's conscious and alert." Clara's hands clenched at her sides. "Can I see him?" Eliza nodded, setting down the basin. "He's been asking for you." "But Clara," she added, lowering her voice, "the sheriff's men are watching the store. If they see you two together after all this—" "I understand the risk," Clara said firmly. Inside the storeroom, Shadow Wolf sat on a wooden crate, his shirt removed to reveal dark bruises spreading across his copper skin. Despite his injuries, he straightened when Clara entered, his eyes warming at the sight of her. "You should not have done this," he said softly, "trading your standing in the town for my freedom." Clara moved to his side, carefully examining his injuries. "I traded nothing of value," she replied. "A community that would condone such injustice is not one I wish to belong to." Her fingers gently traced a cut along his cheekbone. "What did they do to you?" "Nothing I have not endured before," Shadow Wolf said. "But there is greater danger coming, Clara. I overheard the sheriff and Officer Brooks speaking of plans for the settlement. They intend to force relocation by week's end." Clara nodded grimly. "Thomas heard rumors of the same. That's why I insisted on written assurance against action on the settlement." "Paper promises," Shadow Wolf said with a touch of bitterness. "My people have seen many of those turn to dust. This one is witnessed by the town council and backed by my threat to sell to the mining company," Clara replied. "It will hold them for now, but your people should still be warned." Shadow Wolf tried to rise but winced in pain. Clara placed a steadying hand on his uninjured shoulder. "You're in no condition to travel yet. There is no time," he insisted. "The agreement buys days, not safety. My people must know what's coming." Thomas Bennett appeared in the doorway, his expression troubled. "Sheriff's deputy just rode by for the third time. They're watching closely." Clara made a swift decision. "Thomas, is your delivery wagon ready?" "Loaded for the Wilkins farm," he confirmed. "Why?" "I need to borrow it, and your help." She turned to Shadow Wolf. "Can you make it to the wagon if we support you?" He nodded, though pain flashed across his features. "Where are we going?" "First to my homestead to gather supplies and horses," Clara explained. "Then to your settlement. I'll take the warning if you can't travel further." "I'll go with you," Shadow Wolf said with quiet determination. Eliza returned with clean bandages and a man's shirt. "It's Thomas's," she explained. "Your clothes were too distinct." As they helped Shadow Wolf dress, Clara outlined her plan. "The delivery wagon will get us out of town without arousing immediate suspicion. Once at my homestead, we'll take horses through the back trails to reach the settlement by nightfall. The sheriff will come after you when he discovers you've helped Shadow Wolf escape town," Thomas warned. "Let him," Clara replied, a new hardness in her voice. "My property, my choice of guests." With Thomas's help, They managed to get Shadow Wolf into the back of the delivery wagon, concealed beneath canvas and crates of supplies. Clara sat beside Thomas on the driver's bench, her hat pulled low over her face. "Be careful," Eliza whispered as they prepared to depart. "The sheriff won't forgive this defiance easily." Clara squeezed her friend's hand. "Thank you for everything." As they drove through town, Clara kept her head down, heart pounding with each passing citizen. At the town's edge, she spotted Officer Brooks, riding in with several soldiers, their conversation with the sheriff's deputy sending a chill through her veins. "They're already planning something," she murmured to Thomas. "The agreement may not hold them long." Once safely beyond town limits, Clara moved to the wagon bed to check on Shadow Wolf. He lay still among the crates, his breathing labored but steady. "Not much farther to my homestead," she assured him, wiping sweat from his brow. His hand caught hers. "Clara," he said softly, "if we reach my people in time, they will need to leave quickly. I may not return." The implications of his words struck her forcefully. She had been focused on immediate action, not considering the aftermath. If the Apache fled, Shadow Wolf would go with them. "I understand," she said, though her heart constricted at the thought. At her homestead, Thomas helped transfer Shadow Wolf to Clara's bed while she gathered supplies and saddled horses. The property still bore evidence of the sheriff's raid: overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and Shadow Wolf's dried blood on her porch. "I can take it from here," Clara told Thomas as she finished loading saddlebags. "You should return to town before you're missed." Thomas looked uncertain. "Are you sure? The trail to the settlement isn't safe, especially with an injured man." "I've lived in these hills for 20 years, Clara reminded him. "I know paths the sheriff's men won't find." After Thomas departed, Clara returned to find Shadow Wolf attempting to rise from the bed. His determination was evident in the set of his jaw, despite the pain clouding his eyes. "The key," he said suddenly. "We need the jail key." Clara frowned in confusion. "What key? You're already free." "Others may not be," Shadow Wolf explained grimly. "If they move against my people, they will take prisoners. We need a way to free them." Clara considered this, then nodded. "Wait here. I have an idea." In her husband's old trunk, she found a collection of keys accumulated over the years. One, she recalled, had come from the previous sheriff when Harold had briefly served as a deputy. Copper Springs had used the same jail for decades. The locks were unlikely to have changed. When she returned with the key, Shadow Wolf had managed to stand, though he leaned heavily against the wall. "We must hurry," he said. "Every moment brings danger closer to my people." Clara helped him mount her gentlest mare, his face pale with pain but resolute. She secured their supplies, including the healing blanket and eagle feather, then mounted her own horse. As they rode away from the homestead, Clara glanced back at the small house that had been her sanctuary for 20 years. She might never see it again, at least not as a home. The realization brought a surprising lack of regret. They traveled slowly through hidden ravines and dry creek beds, avoiding the main trails where the sheriff's men might patrol. Shadow Wolf, despite his injuries, proved an excellent guide, indicating shortcuts and hidden paths even in his weakened state. By late afternoon they had covered half the distance to the settlement when the sound of approaching horses froze them in place. Clara led their mounts into a dense thicket just as several riders passed on the trail below. Sheriff Adams and 2 deputies, riding hard toward town. "They've been to the settlement," Shadow Wolf said grimly when the riders had passed. "Probably to scout before bringing soldiers." Clara's jaw tightened. "Then we need to move faster." As dusk approached, Shadow Wolf's condition worsened. The rigorous journey had reopened cuts and strained his injured ribs. When he nearly fell from his horse while crossing a shallow stream, Clara insisted they stop briefly. "You won't help your people by dying before we reach them," she said firmly, helping him drink from her canteen. Shadow Wolf accepted the water, his breathing labored. "You are as stubborn as an Apache woman," he murmured, a ghost of a smile touching his lips.
I'll take that as a compliment, Clara replied, checking his bandages. The wound on his temple had begun bleeding again, and his skin felt hot to the touch. Fever was setting in, a dangerous development. We have maybe an hour of light left, she said, looking at the setting sun. How much farther? Beyond that ridge, Shadow Wolf replied, gesturing to a formation silhouetted against the darkening sky. There is a hidden approach from the north that few outsiders know. Clara helped him back onto his horse, concern growing as she felt the tremors in his muscles. The journey was taking a severe toll, but they had no choice but to continue. As they approached the ridge, Shadow Wolf suddenly tensed, raising a hand for silence. In the gathering dusk, Clara strained to hear what had alerted him. Then she caught it. Voices carried on the evening breeze, the metallic clink of military equipment. Soldiers, Shadow Wolf whispered, already positioning around the settlement. Clara's heart sank. We're too late. No, Shadow Wolf said with sudden urgency. There is still time, but we must separate. I will create a diversion to the east. You must reach the settlement from the north, and warn my people. You're in no condition to face soldiers alone, Clara protested. Shadow Wolf's eyes held hers with fierce intensity. My people trust you. Shadow Wolf's eyes held hers fierce intensity. The medicine woman whistled. Tell them to go to the hidden canyon beyond Twin Peaks. They know the place. Clara wanted to argue, but the distant voices were growing louder. Clara wanted to argue, but the distant voices were growing louder. With a decisive movement, Shadow Wolf pressed the jail key into her palm, his fingers lingering against hers. Whatever happens, he said softly, know that you have given me something I thought I'd so lost to you. Before Clara could respond, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. A brief tender kiss that conveyed everything words had left for hers. A brief tender kiss that conveyed everything words had left. Tender kiss that conveyed everything always. Tender kiss that conveyed after conveyed. A brief tender week. Tender conveyed. Live. Live.
Now go, he whispered, already turning his horse toward the eastern slope. With a heavy heart, Clara urged her horse northward, following Shadow Wolf's directions. Behind her, she heard him begin a traditional Apache song, his voice rising strong despite his injuries. The sound drew shouts from the soldiers, just as he had intended. Tears blurred Clara's vision as she rode toward the settlement, the jail key clutched tightly in her hand, and the taste of Shadow Wolf's kiss still on her lips. Whether she would see him again, she couldn't know. But in this moment, she had a people to save, his people who had somehow become important to her as well. As night fell completely, Clara approached the Apache settlement from the north, praying she wasn't too late. Clara approached the Apache settlement with caution, her mount's hooves muffled by pine needles covering the hidden northern path. The night had deepened, but ahead she could see the settlement's perimeter illuminated by military lanterns. Soldiers had established positions on the southern and eastern approaches, just as Shadow Wolf had feared. Staying within the tree line, Clara circled until she found an unwatched stretch of ground behind the medicine woman's wickiup. She dismounted, tethered her horse to a juniper, and crept forward. Her heart pounded as she registered the sounds of the settlement, worried conversations in Apache, children crying, the occasional sharp command from a soldier at the perimeter. Clara hesitated at the edge of the darkness, suddenly aware of her vulnerability. Would they trust her, a white woman, arriving alone with warnings of danger? Before she could decide how to proceed, a voice spoke directly behind her. The white woman comes without my nephew. Clara spun around to find Shadow Wolf's aunt standing in the shadows, her lined face impassive in the faint moonlight. Shadow Wolf is creating a diversion to draw soldiers away, Clara explained quickly. The territorial authorities plan to force relocation, possibly tomorrow. You must prepare your people to leave tonight. The medicine woman studied Clara's face, Why would you betray your own kind to help us? Because what they're doing is wrong, Clara replied simply. And because Shadow Wolf has become, she faltered, unable to find adequate words. The old woman's expression softened. Come, the council must hear this. Inside the central council wickiup, Clara found herself facing the tribe's elders and warriors. Tall Pine, Shadow Wolf's friend, was among them, his expression suspicious but not hostile. The medicine woman spoke rapidly in Apache, occasionally gesturing toward Clara. When she finished, Tall Pine addressed Clara directly. Where is Shadow Wolf now? Creating a diversion east of here, Clara said, her voice tight with worry. He was injured during imprisonment, but insisted on helping. He told me to tell you to go to the hidden canyon beyond Twin Peaks. Murmurs spread through the gathered Apache as this was translated. An older man with a deeply lined face spoke, his words clearly carrying authority. Chief Black Hawk asks how many soldiers, Tall Pine translated. I counted at least 15 on the approaches, Clara replied, and more will likely come from town by morning. Sheriff Adams has been waiting for an excuse to move against you. As the chief responded, Clara heard urgency in his tone. Tall Pine nodded. We begin preparation immediately, women and children first, with essential supplies. Warriors will cover the retreat. The wickiup emptied quickly as people dispersed to prepare. The medicine woman remained, studying Clara intently. My nephew risked much for you, she said finally, and now you risk much for us. He said you would understand, Clara replied, unconsciously touching her lips where Shadow Wolf had kissed her. The medicine woman nodded, as if confirming something to herself. Help the mothers with the children, she instructed. Your horse is strong and can carry 2 little ones. For the next hour, Clara worked alongside the Apache women, helping load travelways with essential supplies and assisting mothers with small children. She gave her horse to a young mother with twin infants, insisting she could walk. The settlement operated with remarkable efficiency despite the crisis, each person knowing their role in the evacuation. Clara was helping an elderly man onto a horse when a commotion at the eastern perimeter drew everyone's attention. Shouts in English cut through the night, followed by the distant crack of a rifle. Shadow Wolf, Clara whispered, instinctively moving toward the sound. Tall Pine caught her arm. No, that is what he wanted, to draw attention while we escape. We must use the time he has purchased. The harsh logic was undeniable, but Clara's heart rebelled. I can't leave him. You must, the medicine woman said firmly, appearing beside them. My nephew chose this path to save his people. Honor his choice. With aching reluctance, Clara turned back to the evacuation. The first groups were already disappearing along the hidden western trail, women and children moving silently into the darkness. In the distance, more shouts and another gunshot echoed across the hills. The soldiers at the perimeter are moving toward the disturbance, Tall Pine reported, returning from a scouting position. We must move now while their attention is divided. Chief Black Hawk issued commands, and the remaining Apache began slipping away from the settlement. Clara found herself in the middle group, helping the medicine woman carry a bundle of healing supplies. As they passed the last wickiup, Clara paused, looking back at the settlement that had been home to Shadow Wolf's people for generations. They will burn it, the medicine woman said, matter-of-factly, as they have burned many of our homes before. The exodus continued through the night, the group moving with disciplined silence through mountain trails, barely visible in the darkness. Clara's legs ached from the unaccustomed pace, but she refused to slow the group. The medicine woman moved with surprising agility, despite her age, occasionally steadying Clara when she stumbled on the rocky path. Near dawn, they reached a narrow pass between towering rock formations. Beyond lay a sheltered canyon with a spring-fed stream, the hidden refuge Shadow Wolf had mentioned. As the exhausted travelers began establishing a temporary camp, Clara stood at the canyon entrance, her eyes fixed on the trail behind them. He will come if he can, the medicine woman said, correctly reading her thoughts. And if he can't? Clara asked, voicing her deepest fear. The old woman touched the pouch at her waist, which Clara knew contained sacred items for communicating with the ancestors. Then his spirit will find us another way. As the sun rose fully, scouts reported that soldiers had indeed discovered the abandoned settlement. Smoke rose in the distance, the wickiups being burned, just as the medicine woman had predicted. But there was no sign of pursuit toward the canyon, nor any word of Shadow Wolf. Clara's exhaustion finally overcame her as she sat watching the trail. She dozed fitfully against a boulder, waking suddenly when a hand touched her shoulder. It was Tall Pine, his expression grim. "Riders approaching," he said simply. From the east, Clara scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. "Shadow Wolf, we cannot tell yet," Tall Pine replied. "Come, the chief wants you present." At the canyon's narrow entrance, Apache warriors had taken defensive positions behind rocks, rifles ready. Clara joined Chief Black Hawk and the medicine woman on a ledge overlooking the approach. In the distance, dust signaled approaching riders. 3 horses, Tall Pine reported, lowering a spyglass. One rider appears injured. Clara strained her eyes, desperate for a glimpse of the approaching group. As they drew closer, she caught her breath. The lead rider's copper skin gleamed in the morning sun, and despite his slumped posture, she would know his silhouette anywhere. "Shadow Wolf," she whispered, relief flooding through her. But her relief quickly turned to alarm as his horse stumbled, nearly unseating its rider. Shadow Wolf was clearly struggling to remain conscious, his shirt dark with what could only be blood. "He's wounded," Clara cried, already scrambling down from the ledge. "We must help him." Before anyone could stop her, Clara was running down the trail toward the approaching riders. As she drew closer, she saw that the other 2 riders were women from the settlement who had been gathering medicinal plants when the evacuation began. Shadow Wolf's head lifted at the sound of her approach. Despite the pain evident in his features, a smile touched his lips as he recognized her. "Clara," he managed, his voice barely audible. "You reached them in time." "Don't talk," she urged, reaching up to steady him as his horse came to a halt. "You're bleeding." "Soldiers," he explained weakly. "Near the eastern ridge. I led them away from the settlement, but..." He winced, one hand pressed to his side, where fresh blood seeped between his fingers. Warriors arrived behind Clara, helping Shadow Wolf from his horse. As they carried him toward the canyon, Clara walked beside him, her hand clutched tightly in his. The bullet had struck his side, but appeared to have passed through cleanly. "The soldiers?" Chief Black Hawk asked as they reached the camp. "Still searching the eastern valleys," Shadow Wolf replied, grimacing as they laid him on a blanket. "They believe the tribe fled that direction. It will buy us a day, perhaps 2. The medicine woman immediately began examining his wound while Clara assisted, providing clean water and bandages from their limited supplies. Despite the severity of his injury, Shadow Wolf's eyes remained alert, fixed on Clara's face as she worked alongside his aunt. "You stayed," he said softly. "When the medicine woman moved away to prepare a healing poultice. Did you think I wouldn't?" Clara asked, gently cleaning dried blood from his forehead. "I hoped," he admitted, but did not dare believe. Clara's hand stilled against his cheek. "My life is with you now," she said simply, "wherever that leads." Shadow Wolf covered her hand with his own, his eyes conveying what his weakened condition prevented him from expressing in words. Around them, the tribe continued establishing their temporary refuge, but for that moment, Clara and Shadow Wolf existed in a world of their own, bridging cultures, defying expectations, and embracing a future neither could have imagined just months before. 3 days passed in the hidden canyon, a time of recovery and planning for the Apache. Shadow Wolf's wound, while serious, had begun to heal under his aunt's skilled care and Clara's attentive nursing. The bullet had missed vital organs, passing cleanly through muscle, and the greatest danger now was infection rather than blood loss. On the morning of the fourth day, scouts reported disturbing news. Soldiers and sheriff's deputies were methodically searching the surrounding valleys, moving ever closer to their sanctuary. Chief Blackhawk called a council meeting to discuss their options. Clara sat beside Shadow Wolf, who insisted on attending despite his weakened condition. He leaned heavily on a carved walking stick, his face drawn with pain, but his eyes clear and determined. The medicine woman had wrapped his torso in bandages infused with healing herbs, their pungent scent mingling with the juniper smoke from the small council fire. "They will find us within 2 days," Tall Pine reported grimly. "Perhaps sooner if they discover the Western Trail." Chief Black Hawk spoke at length in Apache, his weathered face revealing little emotion. Shadow Wolf translated quietly for Clara. "He says we have 3 choices. Continue fleeing deeper into the mountains where the old and young may not survive the journey. Divide into small groups that might evade detection but leave us vulnerable, or make us stand here where the narrow pass gives us defensive advantage." Opinions divided among the council members, with younger warriors advocating resistance, while elders counseled continued retreat. Clara listened carefully, observing the dynamics of decision-making, so different from the hierarchical authority she had known in white society. When a lull came in the discussion, Clara spoke hesitantly. "May I offer a thought?" All eyes turned to her, some surprised, others suspicious. Shadow Wolf nodded encouragingly. "The sheriff and Officer Brooks believe they can act with impunity because no one challenges their authority," Clara said. "But there are others in Copper Springs who disagree with their actions, people who helped us escape, who question these tactics." Shadow Wolf translated her words, which prompted vigorous discussion among the council. Chief Black Hawk asked a direct question, which Shadow Wolf relayed. "The chief asks what you suggest," he said. "Our people cannot trust the territorial authorities who have broken every treaty." Clara straightened, an idea forming. "What if we could bring witnesses, people from town who would see the truth of your peaceful intentions and the injustice of forced relocation?" More discussion followed, with Tall Pine voicing clear skepticism. "Why would any white people come? Why would they care? Because some of them are good people caught in a bad system," Clara insisted. "Thomas and Eliza Bennett helped us. Reverend Simmons questioned the sheriff's actions. Even some council members were uncomfortable with breaking the agreement about your settlement." Shadow Wolf considered this, then added his own thoughts in Apache. The discussion continued, eventually leading to a compromise plan. They would send for potential allies from town, while preparing both for defense and further retreat. "I will go," Clara volunteered. "I can reach the Bennetts without being detected." "Too dangerous," Shadow Wolf objected immediately. "The sheriff will be watching for you, which is why I must go instead of any Apache," Clara countered. "I can move in white society in ways your people cannot." The logic was undeniable, though Shadow Wolf's expression revealed his deep concern. After further discussion, the council agreed to Clara's proposal. She would leave under cover of darkness, taking a circuitous route to avoid patrols. As the council dispersed, Shadow Wolf pulled Clara aside, his face troubled. "This plan places you in grave danger," he said quietly. "If Adams captures you, he won't," Clara assured him, though her confidence exceeded her certainty. "I know these hills better than his deputies." Shadow Wolf reached for his belongings and withdrew his bow, a beautifully crafted weapon of horn and sinew that had been his father's. "Take this," he said, offering it to her. Clara hesitated. "I don't know how to use it properly." "It is not for use," Shadow Wolf explained. "It is a symbol of our trust in you. No Apache would give such a weapon to someone outside the tribe unless they were considered family." The significance of the gesture was not lost on Clara. She accepted the bow with appropriate solemnity, cradling it carefully in her arms. "I will return," she promised. Shadow Wolf's hand cupped her cheek, his thumb gently tracing her cheekbone. "You carry my heart with you, Clara Winters. Return it safely." That night Clara prepared for her journey, equipped with a small pack of supplies and detailed knowledge of hidden trails to town. The medicine woman approached as she was checking the cinch on her saddle. "My nephew believes your plan may succeed," the old woman said. "I am less certain." Clara paused in her preparations. "You think I'm wrong to try? I think the white man's appetite for our land will not be satisfied by witnesses or words," the medicine woman replied bluntly. "But I also see that you must try." She pressed something into Clara's palm, a small leather pouch containing herbs. "For courage and clear thinking," she explained. "Keep it close." Shortly before midnight, Clara prepared to depart. Shadow Wolf insisted on accompanying her to the canyon entrance despite his injury. They walked in silence under the star-filled sky, both aware of the risks ahead. At the narrow pass, Shadow Wolf pulled Clara into a careful embrace, mindful of his wound. "3 days," he said. "If you have not returned by then, we must assume the worst and move deeper into the mountains." Clara nodded, committing his face to memory, the proud profile, the intelligent eyes, the mouth that had spoken truth to her, when others offered only comfortable lies. "I'll bring help," she promised. "Whatever it takes." Their parting kiss held both passion and desperation, a physical promise of return. Then Clara mounted her horse and rode into the darkness, Shadow Wolf's bow secured across her back. The journey to Copper Springs required all Clara's knowledge of the land. Twice she spotted military patrols and was forced to hide in dense undergrowth until they passed. By dawn, she had reached the wooded hills overlooking town, where she concealed herself and her horse for the day. As dusk approached, Clara cautiously made her way to the back of Bennett's general store. The risk was enormous. Sheriff Adams had likely posted watchers expecting her to contact her friends, but she had no choice. Leaving her horse tethered in the woods, she approached on foot, staying in shadows. The store appeared quiet, closed for the evening. Clara tapped softly on the back door, heart pounding. After a moment, Thomas Bennett's voice came through the wood. "Who's there?" "It's Clara," she whispered. "Please, I need your help." The door opened just enough for her to slip inside. Thomas quickly closed and locked it behind her. Eliza emerged from the living quarters, gasping at Clara's appearance. "Good heavens, we thought you might be dead," she exclaimed, embracing her friend. "The sheriff has been telling everyone you were kidnapped by the Apache," Thomas explained grimly. "There's a search underway, though many suspect you left willingly." Clara quickly outlined the situation: Shadow Wolf's injury, the hidden canyon, the approaching soldiers, and her plan to bring witnesses to prevent violence. The Bennetts exchanged troubled glances. "It's worse than you know," Thomas said. "Officer Brooks has declared martial law in the territory. He's authorized the sheriff to use all necessary force to recover you and subdue any Apache resistance. They're planning a military action," Eliza added. "Not just relocation, but potentially massacre." Clara finished, cold dread washing over her. "We have to stop them. We've been gathering supporters," Thomas said. "People who question the sheriff's methods and Brooks's authority. Reverend Simmons has been quite vocal, and Councilman Parker has expressed private concerns." "How many would come with us to the canyon?" Clara asked. "Perhaps a dozen," Thomas estimated. "Not enough to stop military action, but enough to serve as witnesses." "We need more than witnesses," Clara realized. "We need someone with authority who can countermand Brooks's orders." Eliza's eyes widened. "The territorial governor's representative, Judge Morrison, is due tomorrow for circuit court. He outranks Brooks." Hope flickered in Clara's chest. "Can we reach him before he meets with the sheriff?" "His stage arrives at noon," Thomas confirmed. "If we intercept him." They spent the night planning, with Thomas slipping out to contact their most trusted allies. By morning, a small group had committed to accompanying Clara back to the canyon, including Reverend Simmons and 3 council members. As Clara prepared to depart to her hiding place until the judge's arrival, Eliza pressed a bundle into her hands. "Food, clean clothes, and this," she said, revealing a small Derringer pistol. "Just in case." Clara tucked the weapon into her boot, praying she wouldn't bleed. "Thank you for everything." "Be careful," Thomas warned. "The sheriff has men watching the roads." Clara slipped out the back door into the pre-dawn darkness,
making her way carefully back the back door into the pre-dawn darkness, making her way carefully back to Hearthwoods. As she reached the edge of the woods, a voice frozen place, well, we're frozen place, Winters returns. Sheriff Adams stepped from behind a tree, his revolver aimed steadily at her chest. Two deputies emerged beside him, rifles ready at toes, emerged beside him, rifles ready. I've been watching the Bennetts for days, he said with Green Sheriff beside him. Will you bring Clark to them eventually?
Clara's mind raced, calculating her slim options. The derringer in her boot was useless. Against 3 armed men, Sheriff, you're making a terrible mistake. The Apache aren't hostile, they're simply protecting their homes. Save your sympathy for the savages, Adams snapped. You're under arrest for aiding Indian insurrection, among other charges. As the deputies moved to seize her, Clara made a desperate decision. Shadow Wolf's bow, still secured across her back, was a symbol she could not surrender. With sudden movement, she bolted into the dense underbrush. A shot cracked behind her, splintering bark near her head. Clara ran with reckless speed, ducking branches and leaping fallen logs. Her knowledge of the terrain gave her a slight advantage, but the deputies were gaining ground. Reaching a steep ravine, Clara half slid down the slope, stumbling at the bottom, but regaining her feet. The creek below offered her only chance. Following it would cover her tracks. Splashing into the knee-deep water, Clara heard shouting above. The sheriff was organizing a wider search. If she could reach her horse, hidden deeper in the woods, she might still escape. The cold water numbed her legs as she pushed upstream, staying low beneath overhanging branches. Each step took her farther from town, from the judge who represented their best hope. But she had no choice. Capture meant not only her imprisonment, but abandonment of Shadow Wolf and his people to whatever fate the territorial authorities planned. As dawn broke fully, Clara finally reached her horse, still concealed where she had left it. The animal nickered softly as she approached, and she pressed her face against its warm neck for a moment, gathering courage. The sheriff would expect her to flee toward the canyon. Instead, she would circle back toward the main road, hoping to intercept the judge's stage before it reached town. It was a desperate gamble, but the only chance remaining. Mounting carefully, Clara kept Shadow Wolf's bow close, drawing strength from what it represented. Whatever happened now, she was no longer simply Clara Winters, the widow from Copper Springs. She had become something else. A bridge between worlds, a woman who had found her true purpose in the most unexpected place. The morning sun cast long shadows across the eastern approach to the hidden canyon. Shadow Wolf stood at the narrow pass entrance, his injured side throbbing beneath the medicine woman's bandages as he strained his eyes toward the horizon. Clara should have returned by now, or at least sent word. She will come if she can, his aunt said, appearing silently beside him. Shadow Wolf nodded, though worry had settled like a stone in his chest. And if she cannot? The old woman's gaze remained fixed on the distant hills. Then we must trust she has done all that was possible. Behind them in the canyon, the Apache prepared for either swift departure or desperate defense. Children and essential supplies were already packed on travois, while warriors positioned themselves strategically around the canyon rim. 3 days had passed since Clara's departure, the deadline they had agreed upon. The scouts report movement to the south, Tall Pine announced, joining them at the pass. Many horses, soldiers most likely. Shadow Wolf straightened despite the pain that lanced through his side. How long? 2 hours. Perhaps less, Tall Pine replied. The chief asks for your counsel. With a final glance at the empty horizon, Shadow Wolf turned back toward the settlement. His responsibilities to his people could not wait, even as his heart pulled in another direction. Clara had risked everything for them. He would ensure her sacrifice was not wasted. In the council circle, Chief Black Hawk listened intently as scouts delivered their reports in rapid Apache. Shadow Wolf translated key points for the medicine woman, who nodded gravely. Soldiers approach from the south and west, Shadow Wolf summarized, perhaps 30 men with rifles. Sheriff Adams rides with them, as does the territorial officer, Doak, and there is no sign of Clara Winters, the chief asked. Shadow Wolf shook his head, the admission painful. None. The chief considered this information, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Then we must assume she was captured or could not reach help in time, he concluded. We will move deeper into the mountains as planned. As the council dispersed to oversee final preparations, a young scout burst into the clearing, breathless with excitement. "Riders," he exclaimed, "from the east, not soldiers." Shadow Wolf moved as quickly as his injury allowed, following the scout to a vantage point overlooking the eastern approach. Through a borrowed telescope, he counted 8 riders approaching cautiously along the hidden trail, the same path Clara had taken 3 days earlier. White men, Tall Pine observed suspiciously, and one woman. Shadow Wolf adjusted the telescope, his heart leaping as he recognized the woman leading the group. "Clara," he breathed, relief washing through him like a cool stream. The riders approached the canyon entrance slowly, clearly aware they were being watched from the rocks above. Clara rode at the front, Shadow Wolf's bow still strapped across her back, a deliberate signal to the Apache observers. Beside her rode Reverend Simmons, recognizable by his clerical collar, and several townspeople Shadow Wolf identified as council members. More surprising was the distinguished-looking man in a formal black coat, who rode just behind Clara. Even at this distance, the silver star pinned to his lapel identified him as a territorial judge, an authority that outranked even Officer Brooks. Chief Black Hawk joined Shadow Wolf at the overlook, studying the approaching party with cautious interest. "The white woman has brought important men," he observed. "This is unexpected." "Clara Winters is a woman of her word," Shadow Wolf replied, unable to keep pride from his voice. The chief glanced at him, a rare smile touching his lips. "Like the women of our people." Warriors escorted the visitors into the canyon, with careful formality. Clara's eyes immediately sought Shadow Wolf, relief flooding her face as she dismounted and moved toward him. "You're standing," she said, stopping just short of embracing him, mindful of the public setting. "And you returned," he replied softly. "With help?" Clara nodded, turning to introduce her companions. "This is Judge William Morrison, the territorial governor's representative. He has authority over Officer Brooks and has agreed to hear our case." The judge stepped forward, removing his hat respectfully. "Chief Black Hawk," he acknowledged, "I understand there has been a serious breach of territorial law regarding your settlement." As Shadow Wolf translated, he noted the chief's surprised reaction to being addressed with such respect. After a measured response from Black Hawk, Shadow Wolf turned back to the judge. "The chief welcomes you to our temporary home and thanks you for coming to speak rather than with weapons." Judge Morrison nodded solemnly. "I was informed by Mrs. Winters and these gentlemen," he gestured to the councilman, "that Officer Brooks and Sheriff Adams have exceeded their authority and violated both written agreements and territorial law." Clara stepped forward. "Judge Morrison was intercepting Brooks's orders when I found him on the road. He had no knowledge of the agreement I negotiated with the town council, nor of Brooks's plans for forced relocation." Shadow Wolf studied the judge's face, looking for signs of deception, but finding only stern determination. "You have the authority to stop the soldiers?" he asked directly. "I do," Morrison confirmed, "and I've already dispatched riders with orders countermanding Brooks's military action. However," he added with practiced diplomatic caution, "I must hear all sides of this dispute before making final determinations." As they moved toward the council area, Clara fell into step beside Shadow Wolf, their hands briefly touching. "You were injured again," she said quietly, noting the fresh bandages visible beneath his shirt. "The wound reopened yesterday," he admitted. "It is nothing compared to what might have happened without your return." Clara's expression darkened. "It was close,"
The sheriff captured me near town. I escaped but couldn't reach the Bennets as planned. Her hand unconsciously touched the derringer, still hidden in her boot. I had to intercept the judge's stage on the main road. Fortunately, he was willing to listen. Before Shadow Wolf could respond, they reached the council circle, where Chief Black Hawk had assembled the tribal elders. The judge and townspeople were seated with formal courtesy, and water was offered according to Apache custom. What followed was unlike any negotiation Shadow Wolf had witnessed in his years as interpreter. Judge Morrison listened more than he spoke, allowing both the Apache leaders and the Copper Springs representatives to present their perspectives. Clara occasionally added details about the sheriff's actions at her homestead. And Shadow Wolf's unjust imprisonment. So I understand the sequence of events, the judge summarized after nearly an hour of testimony. Sheriff Adams violated a written agreement regarding the Apache settlement, fabricated charges against Mr. Wolf here, conducted an illegal search of Mrs. Winter's property, and then conspired with Officer Brooks to conduct military action against peaceful natives, contra the territorial policy. That's correct, Your Honor. Councilman Parker territorial policy. That's correct, Your Honor. Councilman Parker confirmed. Many of us were pressured into silence, but Mrs. Winter's actions forced us to examine our consciences. The judge turned to Chief Blackhawk. And your people have no desire for conflict. You wish simply to remain on your traditional conflict. You wish simply to remain on your traditional lands. After Shadow Wolf translated, the chief replied with dignity. Tell him we have lived in these valleys since before his people crossed the Great Wolf. We wish only to raise our children in peace on the land of our ancestors. As Shadow Wolf relayed these words, distant shouts and land of our ancestors. As Shadow Wolf relayed these words, distant shouts interrupted the council. A scout ran into the clearing, escorted the council. Soldiers, he reported, at the southern approach, many men with rifles. Judge Morrison moved Brooks. Many men with rifles. Judge Morrison beat Brooks and Adams, likely unaware of my countermanding word. He turned to the townspeople. Gentlemen, I believe it's time to demonstrate the rule of
Hodil Sudan, to demonstrate the rule of law to our overzealous officials. The southern approach to the canyon narrowed to a passage barely wide enough for 3 horses abreast. Here Judge Morrison positioned himself with the town councilman and Reverend Simmons. Behind them, Apache warriors took defensive positions among the rocks, bows and rifles ready but hidden from immediate view. Shadow Wolf insisted on joining them, despite his injury, with Clara refusing to leave his side. They stood slightly behind the judge as dust on the trail heralded the approaching force. Officer Brooks appeared first, resplendent in his territorial uniform, followed by Sheriff Adams and approximately 20 armed men, a mixture of soldiers and deputies. Their confident advance faltered at the sight of Judge Morrison standing calmly in their path. "What is the meaning of this?" Brooks demanded, reining his horse to an abrupt halt. "I might ask you the same question, Officer Brooks," Morrison replied coolly, "particularly regarding your unauthorized military action against peaceful tribal members." Brooks's face flushed with anger and confusion. "Judge Morrison, I don't understand your presence here, sir, but we are conducting a lawful operation to relocate hostile Indians and rescue a kidnapped woman." "I see no hostile Indians," the judge observed mildly. "And Mrs. Winters," he gestured to Clara, "appears to be here of her own free will." Sheriff Adams pushed his horse forward, his face darkening as he spotted Clara standing beside Shadow Wolf. "That woman is under arrest for aiding Indian insurrection," he declared, "as is that Apache for numerous violations of territorial law. Your arrest warrants have been suspended, pending investigation," Judge Morrison stated firmly. "I have reviewed evidence suggesting serious misconduct on your part, Sheriff Adams, including violation of written agreements, false imprisonment, and abuse of authority." The sheriff's hand drifted toward his pistol. "With all due respect, Your Honor, you don't understand the situation here. These savages are under my protection, Morrison interrupted sharply. As is Mrs. Winters, I have already dispatched communications to the territorial governor regarding this matter. A tense silence fell as the sheriff and Officer Brooks exchanged glances, clearly calculating their options. The armed men behind them shifted uncomfortably, their confident mission suddenly undermined by the judge's authoritative presence. Shadow Wolf observed the standoff with cautious hope. The presence of the judge and respected townspeople had changed the dynamics, but armed men with wounded pride remained unpredictable. His hand found Clara's, their fingers intertwining as they waited for the confrontation to resolve. The balance tipped when Reverend Simmons stepped forward, addressing the armed men directly. Brothers, we have been misled. There is no threat here, only families seeking to live in peace. Would Christ have us raise weapons against them? Several deputies lowered their rifles, unwilling to contradict their spiritual leader. Seeing his support eroding, Sheriff Adams made one final attempt. Judge, if you'd speak with me privately, I can explain certain financial considerations that make this relocation necessary, he said, his voice low with implied conspiracy. The mining interests have assured substantial territorial revenues. Are you attempting to bribe a territorial judge, Sheriff Adams? Morrison asked loudly, his eyebrows raised in exaggerated surprise. Adams paled as several councilmen muttered in disapproval. His last gambit had backfired spectacularly, revealing the true motivation behind his persecution of the Apache. Officer Brooks, recognizing the shifting tide, straightened in his saddle. Men, lower your weapons, he ordered. We will comply with the judge's authority while this matter is clarified. As the confrontation de-escalated, Clara's grip on Shadow Wolf's hand tightened. They had averted immediate disaster, but the future remained uncertain. The judge had intervened, but territorial politics were complex and mining interests powerful. Shadow Wolf met Clara's questioning gaze with a slight nod. Whatever came next, they would face it together, a bridge between two worlds that others had tried and failed to keep apart. 6 months later, Clara sat on the porch of her homestead, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in hues of amber and gold. The land looked different now, no longer simply her isolated refuge, but part of something larger, a bridge between communities slowly learning to coexist. The changes had come gradually after Judge Morrison's intervention. The sheriff had been removed from office, his corruption exposed when investigators discovered payments from mining companies. Officer Brooks had been reassigned to a distant post, his career prospects dimmed by the scandal. More significantly, the judge had issued a binding territorial order, protecting the Apache settlement within its traditional boundaries, not the expansive territory they deserved, but enough to maintain their way of life with dignity. Clara smoothed the colorful wedding blanket draped across her lap, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns woven by Shadow Wolf's aunt. The ceremony 3 months ago had combined Apache traditions with elements Clara had cherished from her own culture, a union of worlds that reflected their relationship. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. Shadow Wolf rode into view, leading a small group of Apache women and children. The medicine classes had become a regular occurrence, with Clara and the medicine woman sharing their combined knowledge of healing herbs and techniques. Shadow Wolf dismounted with fluid grace, his injury long healed. He greeted Clara with a warm smile that still caused her heart to quicken, even after months of marriage. A successful journey, she asked as he joined her on the porch. Very, he replied. The trading went well in town. Mrs. Bennett has agreed to stock our woven blankets in her store. This small economic connection was one of many developing between the communities. Under Reverend Simmons' influence, attitudes in Copper Springs were slowly changing. Not all embraced the new relationship. Some families had left town rather than accept the Apache presence, but enough remained open to possibility. The medicine woman emerged from Clara's house, where she had been preparing for the day's teaching. Her wrinkled face revealed satisfaction as she observed the Apache women setting up a demonstration area in the yard.
The young ones learn quickly, she commented. Both your ways and ours. Clara nodded, grateful for the old woman's acceptance.
Initially skeptical of her nephew's choice, the medicine woman had become Clara's strongest ally and teacher, guiding her through Apache customs with patient understanding. "Will Tall Pine join us today?" Clara asked Shadow Wolf. "Later," he replied. "He is meeting with the new territorial representative about expanding our trading permissions." Tall Pine had emerged as an unexpected diplomat, his initial suspicion of white society giving way to pragmatic engagement. He remained fiercely protective of Apache traditions, but recognized the necessity of adaptation in changing times. As the lesson began, Clara watched the easy interaction between the women of both communities. Children played together, unconcerned with the differences that had once seemed insurmountable to their parents. The future would not be without challenges, but here, in this moment, she glimpsed what might be possible. Shadow Wolf's hand found hers, his touch still sending warmth through her after all these months. "Happy?" he asked quietly. Clara considered the question. Her standing in white society remained complicated. Some former friends avoided her, uncomfortable with her choices. Yet others had demonstrated unexpected support. The Bennetts had become like family, and Reverend Simmons regularly visited to discuss ways of building stronger connections between the communities. "Yes," she answered truthfully, "though not in ways I would have imagined." Shadow Wolf nodded, understanding the complexity of her response. "My aunt says life is like the river. It finds new paths when old ones are blocked, but always continues forward." The wisdom resonated with Clara's experience. 20 years of widowhood had taught her resilience, but Shadow Wolf had shown her something different: the possibility of joy after sorrow, of connection after isolation. As the evening settled around them, students and teachers gradually departed, leaving Clara and Shadow Wolf alone on their porch. The homestead had evolved with their marriage, incorporating elements of both cultures. A traditional Apache summer shelter stood near the adobe house, and new gardens grew plants for both medicine and food. "I received a letter from Judge Morrison today," Clara mentioned as they watched the first stars appear. "He writes that our arrangement here is being studied as a possible model for other territories." Shadow Wolf raised an eyebrow. "They wish to learn from us." "Apparently so," Clara said with a smile, "though I suspect we still have much to learn ourselves." Shadow Wolf gazed thoughtfully at the darkening landscape. "When I was a boy, my father told me that understanding comes not from speaking, but from listening. Perhaps that is what was missing before. True listening between our peoples." Clara leaned against his shoulder, content in the shared silence that had become one of the treasures of their relationship. They didn't need constant words to communicate. They had learned to listen to each other in deeper ways. As the moon rose, Shadow Wolf spoke again. "Do you ever regret it, choosing this path?" Clara thought of her former life, respectable but isolated, secure but hollow. She had traded predictability for complexity, comfort for meaning. The journey had brought pain and danger, but also profound connection and purpose. "Not for a moment," she replied honestly. "Every choice has consequences, but some are worth any price." In the distance, the lights of the Apache settlement twinkled like earthbound stars, no longer hidden but proudly visible. Between the settlement and the town lay Clara's homestead, no longer a place of solitude, but a sanctuary where two worlds met. Shadow Wolf followed her gaze, understanding her thoughts without words. "My people have a saying, the strongest bonds are those forged in the hottest fires." "We certainly faced our share of fire," Clara said with a soft laugh. "And emerged stronger," Shadow Wolf agreed, his arms sliding around her shoulders. As night fully claimed the sky, they remained on the porch, watching the moon trace its path across the heavens. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with shared understanding that needed no voice. Later, as they prepared for sleep, Clara paused by the small table where she kept her most treasured possessions. Harold's pocket watch lay there, now ticking steadily, but no longer representing obligation or regret. Beside it rested Shadow Wolf's eagle feather and a small carved horse he had made for her during their courtship. These objects told the story of her journey, from dutiful wife to independent widow, to a woman who had found the courage to build a life on her own terms. A life rich with meaning, connection, and yes, love, the one thing she had once believed would forever elude her. Shadow Wolf joined her, his reflection appearing beside hers in the small mirror above the table. Their images merged in the glass, different yet harmonious, separate yet united. "I never thought I'd be truly loved," Clara said softly, echoing the confession she had made to him that first day on her porch, when a chance encounter had changed the course of two lives. Shadow Wolf turned her gently to face him, his dark eyes reflecting both moonlight and devotion. He leaned closer, his voice a warm whisper against her cheek. "That changed today," he replied, completing the circle of their story, "and changes again with each new sunrise we share." As Clara melted into his embrace, she realized that her life had become something she had never dared to imagine, not a compromise between cultures or a rebellion against convention, but something entirely new. Something born of courage, nurtured by understanding, and sustained by love that had bridged worlds once thought unbridgeable. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance, witnessing silently as two people from different worlds found in each other the home they had both been seeking all along.